Hello again, and welcome to Get Off My Lawn. I'm your host, Tom Curley. Today we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to tell you a children's story for older people. Once upon a time, there was a bottle of baby aspirin. It contained a few hundred baby aspirins. Now, they didn't know they were in an aspirin bottle. In fact, they didn't know that they were baby aspirins. All they knew is that one day they all woke up, piled on top of each other in a very dark place. Well, they introduced themselves to each other and they began asking questions. Mostly questions about where they were, who they were, and why they were there, wherever there was. And this went on for a while, until one day, the most amazing thing happened. They all heard a loud screeching sound, and all of a sudden, the top of their world disappeared. They all looked up to see the sky above them, which looked like a giant, round, white, puffy cloud. But one side of the cloud was sort of pushed aside, and a bright light was pouring in. Now, as they were all trying to process this, their whole world suddenly rose up and turned completely upside down, and they all crashed into the giant, white, puffy cloud. Now, it was surprisingly soft and comfortable, and it made them feel, well, protected. And it also stopped them from falling out of the sky. Except for one baby aspirin who fell through the hole in the sky and disappeared into the bright light. And just as the baby aspirins were coming to terms with their new world orientation, the whole world turned upside down again and dropped with a large thud. Now, the loud screeching noise returned, and the world once again went dark. Well, needless to say, this event made for a great deal of discussion amongst all the baby aspirins. Mostly questions like, what the hell just happened? Where did that light come from? What the hell happened to Phil? He just disappeared into the light. Now, I'm not sure that baby aspirins have names, but if they did, I think Phil would be a very appropriate one, and we will find out why later. Anyway, the baby aspirins soon learned that this phenomenon happened again and again and again, always with the same amount of time in between events. No matter how much they thought about it, no matter how much they talked about it, they just couldn't figure out what was going on. Then, one day, during the upside down time, not one, but 5 baby aspirins fell through the hole in the sky. All the other baby aspirins recoiled in horror. And then the most amazing thing happened. 4 of the baby aspirins fell back from the sky into the bottle. And then the world turned right side up again, like it always did. Now, all the baby aspirins, you realize there were much fewer of them by now. They all gathered around the 4 that returned and asked them, what happened? What did they see? They told them that they fell onto a giant hand that was attached to an unimaginably huge something. They decided that it must be a god. The hand then tipped sideways and they all fell back through the hole in the clouds and back into their world. All of them except one, Phil. Phil turns out to be a very popular name amongst baby aspirins. As you can imagine, this led to a very robust discussion about the meaning of life and their role in it. Now, as time went on, the occurrences of more than one baby aspirin falling out of the sky and returning happened more and more. One day they got another clue about what was happening to them. One of the returning aspirins, Phil, had a startling story. He said he fell onto the giant hand of God with the others, but he continued rolling until he fell off the hand of God and dropped for a long, long time. And then he crashed onto a huge flat surface. Suddenly, another hand of God appeared over the first hand and plucked up a single baby aspirin. As it rose up, a giant hole appeared in the head of the god, and the hand threw the poor baby aspirin into the giant hole, and the hole closed up. Then the hand suddenly came down and picked Phil up and dropped him into the hole in the sky. Well, Phil was now convinced that their purpose in life was to be sacrificed to a cruel and unimaginably huge god. Now, some agreed with him and some didn't. But from that time on, Baby Aspirin Phil always tried to avoid the hole in the sky whenever the great upside downing came. And then one day, Phil realized he was alone. He was the last one. The last baby aspirin. He felt so alone. He had nobody to talk to. Well, that wasn't exactly true. He could talk to what everybody referred to as the huge gray cylinder. Now, nobody knew what it was or why it was there, but it had been there since the beginning. And it did talk. The only problem was, no matter what you asked it, it always said the same thing.
I keep you dry.
Well, as you can imagine, Phil was very sad, knowing that it was only a matter of time until the next great upside downing would come, and it would probably be his last. Sure enough, it did. Well, Phil, he tried to avoid the great hole, but this time the world just kept shaking and shaking and shaking, and suddenly the giant puffy cloud got sucked into the light and disappeared. Well, screaming, Phil fell through the hole out of his world for the last time. Sure enough, he landed in the great hand of God, and soon the other great hand of God plucked him up and flung him into the giant hole in the head of God. Phil was terrified. He found himself sliding down a very, very long tunnel. It was wet and slippery. And then suddenly he crashed into a great pool of liquid. And just as he was trying to orient himself to his new world, he began to feel different. He was becoming less and less Phil. He realized, dissolving. Phil thought to himself, is this it? Am I dying? Is this what happened to all the other baby aspirins? Wow. But as Phil continued to dissolve, he soon discovered that he was still Phil. He found himself suddenly in a great flowing river that was encased in a giant tube. And as he flowed along, he soon realized that he wasn't alone. He was still alive, but all of his brothers, many of them, were there with him. Now, the rest were in different parts of the great river. Phil, they all cried, it's so great to see you. It's about time you got here. What took you so long? Well, as you can imagine, Phil was very confused. What is this? He cried. Why are you all here? Why am I here? What is this river? And what are all those giant round things? Well, at this, the others all laughed. Well, the river goes on forever, they said. And we're here to help those giant red round things. We are? Said Phil. How? Just wait, said the others. You'll see. A few minutes before all this happened, the great god, who was actually just an average guy named Phil. See, I told you this would become important later. Well, anyway, Phil was putting on his coat, and he was about to leave his house on his way to work. At this point, his wife called out to him from the kitchen with the question she asked him every day before he left for work.
Did you remember to take your pills?
Yes, I remembered to I forgot to take my baby aspirin.
That's why I remind you every day,
replied Phil's wife. Well, Phil sighed, took off his coat, and he went back upstairs to take his pill. Now, what Phil didn't know was that as he was climbing up the stairs, A thrombosis in his lower leg broke loose, and an ever-expanding blood clot started racing up his leg on the way to block his heart or his brain. Now, by the time the clot got to either place, it would be big enough to give him a massive stroke or a very, very bad heart attack. Well, Phil reached the bathroom. He picked up the bottle of baby aspirin like he did every day. He removed the cap, turned the bottle upside down, and tried to shake a pill out. Nothing happened. He shook harder and a little harder, but still no luck. He realized that the time had finally come that he had to take the cotton out of the top of the bottle. He had always made a small hole on one side of the cotton when he opened a new bottle because it usually allowed only one pill to come out at a time when he shook it. Well, most of the time. So, Phil dug the cotton stuffing out of the bottle and tossed it in the wastebasket. Next out was the gray cylinder filled with a desiccant that kept the pills from sticking together due to moisture.
I keep you dry.
And then at last, out came the pill. The last one. The last baby aspirin. Phil tossed the empty bottle into the wastebasket and yelled to his wife, "Honey, do we have any more baby aspirin? I just used the last one." At this point, he quickly realized that she couldn't hear him upstairs, so he headed back downstairs. Now, while all this was happening, Phil, baby aspirin Phil, suddenly became aware of a presence. He didn't know what it was, but it was huge, and it was coming right at him. "What the hell is that?" Phil screamed. "It's why we're here," cried his brothers. "Attack!" Well, baby aspirin Phil had no idea what they were talking about, but the big mysterious thing did seem malevolent, evil. And as his brothers surrounded it, he noticed that it seemed to start breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. It was dissolving, just like he did when he fell into the great pond. Well, it didn't seem happy about what was happening to it, but soon it just disappeared. And then Phil understood. He understood why he was here, what his purpose was in life. He was no longer alone. He was no longer afraid. And for the first time in his life, Phil smiled as he continued to drift down the great river of life. Meanwhile, the great God, aka Ordinary Phil, reached the bottom of the stairs and started to put his coat back on, having no inkling he had just dodged a huge bullet and almost died. He again asked his wife, "Honey, do we have any more baby aspirin? I just used the last one." "No," she replied, "but I'm going to the store today. I'll get more so you have it for tomorrow." And with that, Phil left the house for work. It was just another ordinary day. But for some reason, Phil thought this day would be a particularly good one. And he smiled. The end. The moral of the story? I don't know. Do stories really have to have a moral? Okay, here's one. Remember to take your pills. Well, that's all for this episode. Thanks for listening. And be sure to listen to my favorite podcast, Serendipity Seeking Intelligent Life on Earth. Still trying. Voicescape's audio theater for the best in audio production and drama. A half-hour radio show, the cult hit from the 80s, is back. And my new co-podcast, Media War Stories, behind-the-scenes tales from the front lines of the media. Well, that's all for this episode. Thanks for listening. Now get off my lawn.